You step softly into the warm, drowsy air of East Africa sometime around 1938. The world hums in distant tension, but here along the sunlit coastal towns, the spice stalls smell of cinnamon, clove, and nutmeg. Gentle breezes stir woven baskets filled with tiny dried seeds and fragrant powders. The vendors chat lazily, unhurried, as they have for centuries. Fishermen pull in their morning catch while those with tall triangular sails glide across the Indian Ocean. The traders, many descended from generations of Arab, African, and Indian merchants, offer carefully measured piles of cardamom, turmeric, and pepper, weighed on simple brass scales. There's a timeless rhythm to these markets. Spices are not just commodities here. They are threads in daily life. Families trade cloves for woven cloth, pepper for bundles of millet. Young children carry small sacks on their heads, their laughter mixing with the calls of seagulls overhead. In the shadows of the wooden stalls, whispers of European politics occasionally drift in. Rumors of German expansion, British preparations, and Italian ambitions swirl faintly. But for most here, war is still a distant, abstract thing. The cloves still grow on the tall trees in Zanzibar. The nutmeg trees still flower in the Comoros. The ginger roots still twist deep in Ugandan soil. As the sun lowers, casting long golden rays across the market, no one can yet imagine how these simple spices will soon be swept into the global chaos of World War II. You wander a little deeper now, away from the open-air stalls and into the shaded courtyards where the hidden spice markets quietly hum. These places are not marked on maps. They exist in back alleys, behind creaky wooden doors, or tucked beneath rustling palm-thatched roofs. Here, the deals are quieter, the buyers more selective. A Portuguese trader in a well-worn linen suit haggles softly with a Swahili merchant over a crate of cardamom. An Indian middleman scribbles notes in a leather-bound book, calculating the weight and price of turmeric shipments bound for Bombay. Or perhaps much farther, in one corner, French agents discreetly examine bundles of dried vanilla beans, their faces impassive, though they know how precious this cargo has become as European plantations falter. Nearby, an American supply officer, far from his usual post, whispers questions about pepper availability, careful not to attract attention. The walls are lined with burlap sacks. Inside are allspice berries, coriander seeds, sesame and saffron. Some shipments are already spoken for, bound for ships that will soon navigate dangerous waters. Others will stay hidden, hoarded in anticipation of price spikes that war always seems to bring. Outside, the everyday market still bustles in the sun, but here in the shade, a more delicate game unfolds. Everyone knows the world may soon change. The war machine in Europe has not yet reached these shores. But the spices are already preparing to travel much farther than anyone here might imagine. The war drums begin to echo louder across Europe, and with them, foreign buyers start to arrive in greater numbers. You watch as new faces blend into the familiar markets, men with stiff collars and wide hats, carrying leather suitcases and speaking hurriedly in clipped accents. British officers, aware of looming naval blockades, quietly approach trusted spice brokers. They seek steady supplies of pepper and cloves, not only for home kitchens, but for the military kitchens that must keep feeding soldiers far from home. Every meal flavored is a small comfort in a world tilting toward chaos. German traders, still maneuvering in neutral territories, negotiate cautiously, hoping to secure rare nutmeg and vanilla shipments before supply lines tighten. They carry letters of credit and whispered assurances, hoping their purchases won't draw unwanted attention. American buyers, some official, some not, begin appearing too. For them, these spices are part of a larger game, stockpiling, rerouting, and ensuring certain goods remain available even if global shipping lanes become battle zones. You notice how the local merchants, seasoned by generations of trade, remain politely aloof. They listen more than they speak, weighing each offer carefully. Prices begin to inch upward, not from greed, but from caution. For every sack of pepper sold today may be twice as valuable tomorrow. The air grows heavier, not with the rich aroma of spice alone, but with the unspoken understanding that these simple trades are no longer just about food. They are becoming part of something larger, something quietly unsettling. You drift now to the island of Zanzibar, where the clove trees sway gently in the coastal breeze. Their tiny buds, pale at first, then deepening into rich crimson, release a warm, sweet aroma that drifts across the fields. For centuries, these cloves have been the island's quiet treasure, long before distant empires laid claim to them. But as war looms larger, the quiet balance begins to shift. The British, who control Zanzibar as a protectorate, tighten their oversight. Cloves are no longer just a colonial export, they are a strategic resource. With shipping routes threatened, The British want to ensure these valuable spices reach Allied markets and not enemy hands. Local farmers, most of whom tend their small plots as their fathers and grandfathers did, feel the pressure. The government sets prices, adjusts prices, and inspects shipments more closely. Middlemen, Indian, Arab, and Swahili merchants, find themselves caught between colonial administrators and anxious international buyers. Occasionally, quiet disagreements spark beneath the surface. Should more cloves be shipped to Britain? Should some be quietly sold to neutral buyers for higher prices? Every decision feels like walking a thin rope, with fortunes and futures swaying in the balance. The cloves themselves remain indifferent. Buds are still picked by hand, sun-dried on woven mats and packed into burlap sacks with the same care as always. But beneath the rhythm of the harvest, the island's calm masks an unease. The world's need for cloves has turned this quiet crop into a small, fragrant piece of wartime diplomacy. Now you travel west, across the waters to the islands of Sao Tome and parts of the Comoros, where nutmeg trees grow under dappled tropical light. The trees are modest, their round fruits splitting open like tiny golden eggs, revealing the prized nutmeg seed wrapped in the lacy red threads of mace. Nutmeg has always carried an air of quiet luxury. Long before this war, empires fought and traded entire islands for control of these precious seeds. Now, as global tensions rise again, nutmeg returns to strategic importance, though in quieter, more peculiar ways. With rationing tightening in Europe and substitutes failing to satisfy, nutmeg becomes valuable not just for seasoning but for morale, adding a sense of normalcy to wartime rations, baking, and even medicinal concoctions for stressed soldiers. Portuguese administrators, still officially neutral, begin quietly guarding their nutmeg harvests. Warehouses are locked at night. Export permits require careful negotiation. Rumors swirl of buyers offering bribes, of sacks disappearing from docks under cover of night. In some places, nutmeg becomes a form of currency. A single bag might trade for wool, fuel, or other wartime essentials. Merchants, sensing opportunity, weigh each transaction carefully, sell now for a tidy profit, or wait for prices to climb even higher as shortages bite deeper. Meanwhile, local farmers continue their work with quiet steadiness, splitting fruit, drying seeds, and wrapping burlap sacks as they always have. The war feels distant, but its shadow stretches even into these gentle groves. You now find yourself deep in the equatorial forests of West Africa, where pepper vines twist lazily up tall trees, their clusters of tiny green berries glistening under the humid canopy. The farmers here harvest the berries carefully, drying them under the hot sun until they turn black and fragrant. Under normal times, much of this pepper would quietly make its way through legal trade routes to European kitchens. But with the world at war, shipping lanes disrupted, and naval blockades tightening, pepper, simple familiar pepper, becomes a minor obsession for cooks, soldiers, and smugglers alike. On paper, colonial governments carefully track every shipment. Export licenses are issued, weights are recorded, destinations are approved. But outside the ledgers, another world quietly flourishes. You follow narrow forest paths where small boats wait by riverbanks under cover of night. Here, black market traders barter sacks of pepper with whispered urgency. Middlemen exchange bundles of tightly tied currency, some legitimate, others counterfeit. Deals are made quickly, and boats disappear into the dark, bound for neutral ports or secret rendezvous with merchant vessels willing to take the risk. For many locals, the black market offers a simple calculation. Official prices are capped and slow to pay. Unofficial buyers pay more, in cash and with fewer questions. But risks run high. Colonial patrols crack down when they can, seizing shipments and punishing traders who push their luck too far. And yet the pepper keeps flowing. Across borders and oceans it finds its way onto officers' tables, into ration kits, and even as bribes slipped into quiet hands. In a world unraveling at the seams, even something as small as a handful of peppercorns becomes quietly powerful. You now drift to the coastal plains of West Africa, to Ghana, Liberia, and Sierra Leone, where a little-known spice quietly flourishes beneath the towering foliage. Grains of paradise. The pods are small, their seeds tiny and reddish-brown, releasing a warm, peppery aroma with hints of citrus and ginger. Long ago, European traders once prized these grains as an exotic substitute for true black pepper. But by the 20th century, grains of paradise had faded into obscurity. At least, until the war disrupted familiar trade routes. With black pepper in short supply and costly to transport through contested waters, clever merchants and colonial officials rediscovered these forgotten seeds. They weren't perfect substitutes, but close enough for spicing up military stews and baked goods when true peppercorns became scarce or unaffordable. You watch as quiet shipments of grains of paradise are bundled into crates labeled simply as seasoning, making their way onto Allied ships docked at African ports. The seeds find their way into British Army kitchens, American mess halls, and even German-occupied territories via neutral intermediaries. For local harvesters, this sudden demand offers both opportunity and uncertainty. Prices rise modestly, and some families begin harvesting the grains alongside their usual crops of cocoa and palm oil. But they also know when the war ends, demand might vanish as quickly as it arrived. The seeds dry on woven mats under the sun, their peppery scent filling the air. A quiet reminder that even the most forgotten flavors can find a second life when history stirs unexpectedly. You now drift across the sea to the island of Madagascar, where cinnamon trees cling to the hillsides, their paper, then bark curling gently under the hands of skilled harvesters. The island's variety, lighter and sweeter than its counterparts, holds quiet appeal for wartime buyers seeking comfort in familiar flavors. But cinnamon presents a problem. It's bulky, fragile, and easy to spot. As naval patrols tighten their watch over cargo ships and enemy submarines lurk beneath shipping lanes, official shipments become risky. And so, in the quiet corners of Madagascar's ports, smugglers grow more creative. You follow them as they carefully roll sheets of cinnamon bark, tucking them into the hollow spaces of empty oil barrels. The barrels, marked as returned containers or machine parts, pass inspection easily under the watchful but often overworked eyes of port authorities. Some barrels make their way to neutral ports in Portuguese Mozambique, where the cinnamon is quietly transferred onto freighters bound for Europe, the Middle East, or even North America. Others slip into the cargo holds of ships under false papers, registered to shell companies no one bothers to investigate too closely. For the smugglers, the profit is worth the risk. Wartime shortages have pushed cinnamon prices far beyond pre-war levels. Bakers and quartermasters alike are willing to pay handsomely for even modest amounts to stretch dwindling supplies. As you stand quietly beside the dock, the smell of cinnamon mixes with salt air and diesel fumes, an oddly soothing scent in a world growing nosier with war. The barrels roll gently onto waiting ships, carrying their secret sweet cargo into the uncertain waters ahead. You now find yourself aboard a quiet Allied supply vessel, gently rocking in the waters off the East African coast. The crew moves with steady rhythm, loading crates and barrels destined for distant fronts. Among the cargo, weapons, canned rations, medical supplies, and tucked among them, sacks of coriander seeds. Coriander may seem an unlikely wartime priority, but its usefulness stretches far beyond simple flavoring. Military cooks, faced with monotonous rations, welcome anything that can add variety to soups and stews. Coriander's gentle citrusy notes lift bland canned meats and powdered potatoes into something almost comforting. You watch as sacks are carefully counted and marked for shipment to field kitchens across North Africa, India, and even the remote Pacific outposts. Unlike more delicate spices, coriander travels well. The seeds resist moisture, pests, and the long weeks at sea. Some shipments carry official stamps, logged in ledgers and declared to customs. Others move more quietly, unofficial additions to larger cargo manifests. Quartermasters know that morale often rests on small details. A pinch of spice here, a hint of home there. On deck, sailors pause for a moment, breathing in the faint aroma escaping from torn seams in one of the burlap sacks. The smell feels strangely out of place amid the scent of oil, salt, and steel. A small reminder of kitchens far away, and meals shared before the world tilted toward war. The engines rumble to life, and the coriander, humble, round, and golden brown, begins its journey toward battlefields where it will flavor not just food, but brief moments of normalcy in a world of uncertainty. You find yourself under a cloudless sky in North Africa, where long caravans of camels sway rhythmically across the sun-baked sand. The war seems far away here, but the cargo these caravans carry is quietly feeding distant armies. Among the bundles of salt, dates, and textiles ride sacks of turmeric, golden powder packed tightly in linen to protect it from the harsh desert air. Turmeric's earthy, warm flavor is prized not only in local kitchens but also in military camps across the region. It colors stews, stretches limited meat supplies, and even finds its way into poultices for minor wounds. With many ports disrupted by naval warfare and rail lines stretched thin, traders have revived these ancient land routes. The caravans move slowly but reliably, threading through remote oases, mountain passes, and desert villages untouched by bombs and tanks. You sit beside the caravan one evening as a small fire crackles. Traders sip sweet tea, their faces lit by the fading sun. Quiet deals are made under starlight. Turmeric bound for British field hospitals in Egypt, for Indian troops stationed in East Africa, and even for French colonial outposts farther inland. The war may be fought with tanks and planes, but here it is turmeric that moves steadily, patiently. Bright yellow against the endless beige of the desert. As dawn breaks, the caravan rises once more, leaving only soft footprints that the wind will soon erase, while the precious spice journeys onward to flavor meals and soothe the aches in places far beyond these silent sands. You now walk through a quiet village in Sudan, where small plots of green fenugreek plants sway gently in the warm breeze. The air carries a faint, sweet aroma, almost like maple syrup, rising from the drying seeds spread out on woven mats beneath the sun. Fenugreek has long held a modest place in local cooking, lending its distinct bitterness to stews and breads. But as war strains global medical supplies, its value quietly rises. The seeds, long used in traditional medicine, are once again pressed into service for their gentle healing properties. In makeshift field hospitals, doctors face shortages of imported medicines. Infections, digestive troubles, and inflammation all demand remedies when modern pharmaceuticals grow scarce. Local healers and military medics alike turn to what they have: fenugreek tea for sore throats, poultices for wounds, and bitter pastes for fever. You watch as harvesters carefully collect the seeds, drying and packing them with care. Some are sold openly to allied procurement officers who have learned to respect the plant's quiet utility. Others are traded informally, passed between villages and field kitchens, where soldiers whisper of its calming effects after long marches or poor rations. In some areas, experiments even begin to test fenugreek's potential as a substitute for scarce nutritional supplements, its high iron and protein content offering one more small defense against wartime malnutrition. As night falls, the fields rustle softly in the breeze. The war rages far away. But here, under the stars, these tiny golden seeds quietly continue their ancient work, nourishing bodies and easing suffering in a world turned upside down. You now find yourself in the lush highlands of Uganda, where rows of green ginger plants spread across red soil under a heavy sky. The rainy season has been kind, and this year's harvest is bountiful, which is fortunate because the world has unexpectedly fallen in love with ginger once again. Before the war, ginger was a steady, unremarkable export, but as global conflict disrupts supply chains, demand surges. Ginger's warmth offers more than flavor. It soothes nausea on long ocean voyages, calms nervous stomachs in field hospitals, and brightens otherwise bland wartime meals. Military buyers arrive early in the season, offering fair prices, sometimes even paying in precious fuel, sugar, or fabric, to secure the freshest harvests. British supply officers arrange shipments not only for themselves but for Indian and African troops stationed across multiple fronts, for whom ginger carries both cultural and medicinal significance. You walk past drying sheds where slices of fresh ginger slowly shrivel under the sun. The air is thick with its sharp, almost spicy scent. Nearby, workers carefully load crates bound for convoys snaking across the continent toward coastal ports. And from there, onto Allied ships that must dodge submarine-infested waters. In camp kitchens, cooks grate ginger into stews to mask the taste of canned meat. In sick bays, ginger tea helps ease seasickness and anxiety. Even in officers' clubs, a dash of ginger syrup finds its way into improvised cocktails meant to lift morale. The world may be rationing butter and rubber, but for now, ginger flows. A small comfort carried across continents, offering warmth and familiarity to soldiers and civilians alike. You now travel to the fields of Ethiopia and Sudan, where sesame plants sway gently under the morning sun. Their small, bell-shaped flowers hide the precious seeds inside, ready for harvest. The war has reached many parts of Africa, but here these tiny seeds quietly step into a surprisingly important role. Sesame oil, rich and shelf-stable, quickly becomes a valued commodity as butter and animal fats grow scarce across the war-torn world. Military quartermasters recognize its usefulness. It requires no refrigeration, can travel long distances without spoiling, and provides soldiers with much-needed calories and flavor. You watch local workers gently cut and stack the stalks, letting the seed pods dry and pop open. The seeds are collected with care, cleaned, and funneled into sacks that will travel far beyond these quiet fields. In makeshift factories along the coast, sesame oil is pressed and poured into large metal drums, bound for Allied camps in North Africa and the Middle East. The oil finds its way into military kitchens, where it's used to fry bread, flavor rations, and even lubricate field machinery when proper supplies run short. For the soldiers, sesame adds a welcome richness to otherwise dreary meals. For the civilians nearby, it becomes a valuable trade item, exchanged for medicine, fabrics, or additional food staples as wartime shortages bite deeper. Even far from battle, These simple seeds fuel an army's stomach, powering marches, supplying campfires, and offering a rare touch of comfort as tanks roll and planes circle overhead. As night falls, the quiet fields remain, patient, steady, while their humble harvest sails off to distant, uncertain futures. You now step softly into the misty hills of southern China and northern Vietnam, where star anise trees bloom in quiet groves, far from the front lines but not untouched by war. Their star-shaped pods, woody, fragrant with a warm licorice scent, have long flavored broths, medicines, and desserts across Asia. But as the Pacific War intensifies, star anise becomes an unlikely point of quiet competition. Japanese forces, controlling much of East and Southeast Asia, seek to secure the spice for their expanding empire. Star anise finds its way into military rations, herbal treatments, and even experimental medicines. At the same time, black market traders smuggle small shipments through remote mountain passes, selling to neutral merchants who, in turn, funnel it toward allied buyers desperate for any remaining supply. You walk through narrow village paths where local farmers, some barely scraping by it, carefully dry the star-shaped pods in woven baskets under weak sunlight. The Japanese officials monitor harvests but cannot watch every trail. Quiet deals are struck after dark, and small caravans slip away into hidden valleys, navigating dangerous routes patrolled by both occupiers and resistance fighters. For some, star anise offers more than trade. It becomes a quiet act of survival and defiance. Neutral smugglers know the risks, but the profits are tempting, and the buyers, in Shanghai, in British Hong Kong, in distant Calcutta, are willing to pay handsomely. As you stand beneath the trees, the sweet, almost calming scent of star anise fills the cool air. The war rages beyond the hills, but here, among these fragile stars, another kind of quiet struggle unfolds. One measured in handfuls of spice, exchanged in whispers. Now you arrive in the farmlands of India's Punjab region, where golden mustard flowers ripple across wide fields under the open sky. The plants sway gently, their tiny seeds ripening inside delicate pods, almost unnoticed amid the great machinery of war unfolding far beyond. Yet mustard seeds, small, round, and humble, have quietly found new purpose in the global conflict. Allied forces, especially the British, draw heavily on India's agricultural wealth to sustain their far-flung armies. Mustard seeds serve two important needs: flavoring rations and producing mustard oil, a valuable cooking fat in an era of scarce butter, lard, and imported oils. You watch as farmers gather the stalks, drying them in the warm breeze before threshing the seeds free. The process remains largely unchanged from generations before. Steady and reliable. Crates of mustard seeds are loaded onto railway cars bound for crowded depots in Calcutta and Bombay. There, some are pressed into oil for military kitchens and hospitals. Others are ground into powdered mustard for canned rations shipped to troops across Africa, the Middle East, and Southeast Asia. The sharp flavor of mustard cuts through the dull monotony of preserved meats, bringing brief moments of warmth to soldiers far from home. In field hospitals, mustard poultices, an old but trusted remedy, are still applied to aching joints and chest colds when more modern treatments run low. As the war grinds on, even the tiniest seeds take on unexpected weight, carrying the hopes of armies and civilians alike. Not in grand battles, but in the small comforts that keep spirits alive. You now step quietly onto the docks of Madagascar, where crates of precious vanilla pods wait beneath heavy tarps. The air is thick with their sweet, almost creamy scent, a comforting fragrance that masks the quiet tension of the harbor. Madagascar's vanilla, delicate, time-consuming to grow, and notoriously hard to transport, has become even more precious as the war deepens. Planes, ships, and submarines prowl the surrounding waters, turning each shipment into a high-stakes gamble. You watch as port workers, under the careful eye of both French colonial officials and private traders, load small, tightly packed crates into the holds of neutral freighters. The routes are indirect, first to Mozambique, then perhaps to Lisbon, from where carefully arranged deals might send them toward Britain or the United States. Each leg of the journey carries risks: pirate attacks, naval blockades, or quiet seizure by belligerent forces hoping to resell the cargo for their own profit. For buyers in Europe and America, vanilla remains more than a luxury. Beyond its use in fine pastries and desserts, it flavors medicinal syrups and nutritional supplements for recovering soldiers. Hospitals ration their vanilla extract carefully, saving it for the most fragile patients. Meanwhile, vanilla farmers on the island tend their vines with the same steady hands as always, carefully pollinating each flower by hand, a practice that leaves no room for error. They know the world wants their crop more than ever, but the dangers of getting it safely to market grow with every passing week. as the freighter's engines hum to life. The sweet scent of vanilla lingers briefly in the air, a fragile, fragrant thread weaving its way through a world unraveling at war. You now find yourself in the cool, dry fields of Iran, where purple crocus flowers bloom briefly at dawn. Farmers rise early, bending gently to pluck the delicate blossoms before the morning sun grows too strong. Inside each flower lie the precious crimson threads. Saffron, the world's most expensive spice. Even in peacetime, saffron travels through quiet, intricate trade routes. But as war carves the world into hostile zones, its movement becomes more secretive, more creative. Official exports slow as shipping lanes falter, but the hunger for saffron remains. For fine cooking, for medicine, for morale. Neutral countries like Switzerland, Turkey, and Sweden become quiet waypoints in saffron's journey. Crates marked as agricultural samples or herbal remedies cross borders under the watch of customs officers who sometimes choose not to ask too many questions. You walk through small back rooms in Istanbul where spice traders sip tea over quiet negotiations. Some saffron will find its way to London's blacked-out kitchens, where cooks stretch meager supplies to brighten special holiday meals for civilians and soldiers alike. Other batches head toward hospital pharmacies, where saffron is used in small doses to flavor nutritional tonics for wounded veterans. For the farmers back in Iran, the war means both rising prices and rising uncertainty. Some receive excellent offers from distant buyers, others fear seizures, delayed payments, or disappearing intermediaries. As evening falls, the crocus fields fall silent once more, waiting for tomorrow's brief harvest window. Each tiny thread carries not just flavor, but a fragile promise of warmth, comfort, and fleeting normalcy in a world torn by conflict. Now you travel into the misty hills of Kerala, India, where cardamom vines cling to the cool, shaded undergrowth beneath tall trees. The air is rich with the scent of eucalyptus, damp earth, and the sweet, resinous fragrance of freshly harvested cardamom pods. Cardamom, sometimes called the queen of spices, was always valuable, but war gives it a new kind of quiet importance. European American buyers, cut off from traditional supply lines, scramble for any available stock. Meanwhile, Indian merchants try to navigate shifting British export priorities, tight shipping allocations, and unpredictable submarine threats. You follow quiet caravans snaking through jungle paths and winding backroads, deliberately avoiding major rail hubs now under heavier Allied control. Traders take no chances, routing cardamom through smaller coastal ports like Mangalore and Cochin, where neutral and semi-official vessels discreetly load the precious cargo. Cardamom finds its way into military kitchens, not as an essential but as a comfort. British officers use it to flavor tea and desserts. Indian soldiers blend it into rich curries that offer fleeting reminders of home on distant battlefields. Some of the best pods even slip into black market auctions in Cairo, Istanbul, and Lisbon, where buyers compete quietly for limited supplies. Prices rise with each successful voyage, and rumors swirl of entire shipments lost to torpedoes or quietly confiscated by desperate navies. Yet here in Kerala's hills, life carries on much as before. Farmers rise early, pick the pods by hand, and spread them to dry under woven canopies. The vines offer no hint of the drama unfolding far beyond, as their fragrant harvest quietly crisscrosses a world at war. You now arrive on the warm, humid shores of Zanzibar, where the clove trees stand like silent sentinels beneath wide tropical skies. Their tiny flower buds, harvested before they bloom, dry slowly in the coastal breezes, releasing their sharp, familiar scent into the air. Cloves have flavored food and medicine for centuries, but during the war, they take on new, quietly important roles. Allied and Axis buyers alike seek cloves not only for baking and cooking, but for their use in pharmaceutical syrups, antiseptics, and even limited medical anesthetics when more modern supplies run short. The British, controlling Zanzibar through their colonial administration, keep a careful watch over the harvest. Export permits become highly regulated. Warehouses along the docks are guarded, their contents counted and recounted, while quiet negotiations with trusted merchants determine who receives which allotments. Still, small amounts of cloves slip through the cracks. Neutral traders from Portugal and Sweden occasionally appear, their ships officially bound for non-belligerent ports, though some of their cargo may eventually find its way to both Allied and Axis buyers through convoluted trade webs. You stroll through narrow stone streets as porters carry heavy burlap sacks down to waiting freighters. The aroma of cloves mingles with the scent of sea salt and kerosene, a strangely calming mixture beneath the tension of global conflict. For local farmers, the war brings both risk and opportunity. Prices rise, but so do the dangers of theft, blockade, and political pressure. Yet the clove trees bloom regardless, offering up their quiet bounty as they always have, steady, fragrant, and untroubled by the distant thunder of war. You now step onto the Emerald Islands of the Dutch East Indies, today's Indonesia, where nutmeg trees rise from volcanic soil, their glossy leaves sheltering bright red mace and brown seeds beneath their fruit. For centuries, nutmeg was one of the world's most valuable spices, once worth its weight in gold. But now, as global war turns sea lanes into hunting grounds, nutmeg once again becomes a quietly contested prize. The Japanese occupation of much of South Asia disrupts official exports. Dutch plantations are seized, and local traders face strict regulations, forced quotas, and limited freedom to sell their harvests abroad. Yet nutmeg's value ensures that clandestine routes emerge quickly. You follow quiet night voyages along narrow island channels, where small boats carry burlap sacks of nutmeg under the cover of dense fog. Smugglers risk naval patrols to reach neutral ships waiting offshore. Vessels flying Swiss, Portuguese, or even Panamanian flags, offering safe passage to distant black markets in India, Africa, and the Middle East. Allied forces desperately seek small quantities for military rations, medical supplies, and holiday treats meant to boost soldier morale far from home. A pinch of nutmeg can transform bland canned puddings into fleeting tastes of comfort. Meanwhile, Axis agents attempt to control what they can, using captured supplies for both domestic use and diplomatic trades with neutral partners. Every sack of nutmeg carries not just flavor, but quiet power in a world short on luxuries. As you stand beneath the trees, the air rich with warm, earthy fragrance, the war seems far away. But each falling fruit is quickly gathered, its journey ahead filled with danger, shadowy deals, and secret voyages across a fractured world.